Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Now, one of the topics that's increasingly appearing on my radar is that many are citing open source as the future. And the UK government's national data strategy even talks about the importance of opening public sector datasets to form the backbone of innovation, efficiency and growth. Now, this particular trend is something that a company called Databricks is betting on in a pretty big way. And there are some big changes coming down the pipeline for the company, especially around a shift to open source. And they have some pretty big names on their roster as well, such as Shell, La Liga, Adobe, HBO, Sega, S&P Global, and so many others. So today, I've invited Dael Williamson onto the podcast to learn much more about this and also learn a little bit more about the story behind Databricks too. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to London here in the UK, where you can join us both in conversation about all this and much more. So, massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Great. So I'm Dael Williamson. I'm the EMEA field CTO at Databricks. And for those who don't know, Databricks is a lakehouse company. We have over 7,000 customers worldwide, and we solve some of the world's toughest problems with data and AI. Personally, I live in the UK. The accent's from Southern Africa, specifically Zimbabwe. I live here in London now with my amazing wife, my brilliant daughter, and we're expecting another little girl any day now. So it's a really exciting time at the moment. What do? I advise clients at an executive level on how to navigate the challenges of adopting a kind of data-driven approach to business. Everything from like how to figure out their data strategy to designing their data organization, figuring out how they find innovation in their sector, transform their business, whether that be kind of at a technology level, operating model level, business level. But also we have a huge pool of clients that are like emerging digital businesses. So we're trying to help them to scale and find distribution. So it's kind of really cool kind of cross-section that we get to work across.
Oh, I love that. And of course, South Africa is a beautiful part of the world. So I've got to ask, what do you miss most about home? Is there anything that you crave? Is it a food item or just a simple pleasure?
It's kind of weird. Like my wife and I used to just sort of go for a run on the mountain after work. And, we lived on the base of Table Mountain. So we could kind of just sort of get home, put on our running gear and go for a run and then come down the mountain and dive into the, arguably one of the coldest seas, but, just incredible. And I do a lot of, I miss my sailing too. I used to do a hell of a lot of sailing on the Cape coastline.
Oh man, sounds beautiful. I miss it for you, man. But if I was to take you back in time again for a moment, can you remember where your passion for tech came from, or just a moment that might have put you on the path you're on today, and share your origin story with everyone?
Well, the passion sparked incredibly early for me. So I've been coding since the age of 4. I copied a game out of a PC magazine for a Texas Instrument, and I'm giving my age away a little bit, but it was called Bat Attack, and I kind of compiled it, I ran it, and I thought, this is awesome. So it was almost like a creative, and that was like age 4. From then I was like kind of hooked, and I've been a coder pretty much ever since. Like, software engineer, mostly sort of open source. So I've been in the open source world for decades. The moment that put me on the real path that I'm on today is, academically, I studied genetics and biochemistry, which kind of led me to technology because, to be honest, lab work is really, it's a lot of blind alleys. And in the sort of technology space in that world, you focus on disciplines, and the discipline I kind of jumped in on was, proteomics, so drug discovery, industrial waste, bioremediation. So all very big problems in Southern Africa. And even by today's standards, like the data we were dealing with was huge, and we were kind of doing machine learning really early. But it was really tedious back then, like sort of constraints, compute, storage, you were grabbing open source tools, you were wiring up clusters, you were like, everything just took an age. Like I actually sailed across the Atlantic while a model ran, and it still wasn't finished when I got to the other side. But it's like really meaningful work because, my studies were like during the HIV But tuberculosis was re-emerging too. And, that gave us a lot of really challenging problems to try and solve. And also on the environmental waste side, there's a lot of mining, so a lot of, challenges to kind of get rid of waste products. So, I kind of fell in love with that beauty of evidence-based insight, like the data mixed with AI and the potential to kind of accelerate progress. But, as I said, it was tedious. It was like really the technology was just not there. It was very immature, and it needed almost like a bunch of Moore's law cycles to kind of. So I kind of thought, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to lean into those. So I rode the Moore's law cycles professionally. I kind of went through the cloud cycle, the automation cycle, product and platform engineering, e-commerce, scaled applications. So I've got a colorful background of experience, but a lot of that was kind of focused on how do I embed data and AI in these sort of spaces, and kind of elevated roles along the way to kind of CTO level. So now it's more about influencing technology teams, processes, the combination of, for me, it's about complex systems. I love complex systems, that sort of system of system thinking. And, managing complexity, whether it be kind of organizations or organisms, they're actually just as complicated as one another, would you believe? So yeah, that's the kind of passion. So I definitely, have the bug.
You really do. And like I say, the passion really comes across in how you're talking about it today as well. And that path would eventually lead you to Databricks. And there will be people listening that are hearing about you guys for the first time. So could you just set the scene, tell me a little bit more about the company and ultimately the problems that you set out to solve with technology?
Well, it's kind of common purpose led me to Databricks. And namely sort of, they go about solving the world's toughest problems, but by democratizing data and AI. So, one of the things I sort of saw what it meant very early on in their kind of creation. So call it like shared pain, right? I'd gone through this. So, while I was trying to understand structures of proteins and kind of doing weird things with clusters of wimpy nodes and Hadoop, they were focused on kind of distributed compute problem at UC Berkeley. So our founders. And actually, when I first met Ali, we kind of geeked out about that sort of thing. I've worked with Databricks as a client. So, I kind of used them as a client in the sort of early days. I was an advisor to clients. So I sort of was on the partner side. Aeronautics Accenture, we made a bet very early on Databricks, to build a practice around it. And as did, the three hyperscaler clouds who are, all investors. So I saw something incredible there that kind of philosophically almost aligned with, how I wanted to see technology sort of emerge. So, the thing I truly enjoy is the kind of tale of convergences. So it really showcases the addressable market that Databricks covers. It's far larger than most people actually realize. So capabilities that have traditionally been in kind of little siloed buckets, around data in the tech stack. Now, the most obvious that everyone's kind of aware of is this convergence between kind of warehouse analysts, those people that look backwards, what was my revenue last week, month, year? Lake scientists, like the people that are looking forwards and trying to build predictive capabilities. So that convergence is a new category that we've created called the Lakehouse. And I'll talk about this quite a bit, but there's other convergences that people sort of don't really notice as much. So things like data processing practices. You've got kind of this entire spectrum from batch all the way to streaming, events, CDC. All of these can be done in a similar approach on Databricks. And that's kind of special because, it means you're not having different teams and different pockets. And that is a massive challenge. Like data engineering is just one of those incredible, complicated sort of areas. And that's all data types, right? The convergence of data engineering and ML engineering. So for me, that's a big one because that was kind of what I did academically, these kind of two sides, and actually recognizing that ML is, just a trained form of transformation. So how do you just kind of build that into your pipelines? Convergence of almost like the entire end-to-end value chain, like the production and distribution of data in all types. So those are just some examples, but I'll kind of stop there. But my favorite part about Databricks is we're an enabling technology platform. This means we're not selling like a pre-built product or, business capability SaaS or a black box that works the same for you as it would to your competitors, right? We want companies to unlock their data and focus on their differentiation. We want you to complete your technology using our technology, and that's a kind of special thing because, yes, you can still accelerate through a buy motion. So you can still buy stuff to complete your architecture. But the choice is yours, and the focus becomes very much around differentiating on your build motion. So like producing high value use cases that make you as a customer different. And that's a very difficult balance to find in the tech space. And I think that's really what, that whole openness is a big sort of area that like attracted me.
And I think that openness that you talk about is one of the big reasons why many are citing open source as the future. And in the UK, the government's national data strategy even talks to the importance of opening public sector data sets to form the backbone of innovation, efficiency and growth. All sounds very cool, but can you expand on that just to set the scene for today's conversation?
I'll sort of say straight off out the gate, I'm probably not the best expert on the nuances of the UK national data strategy because it's quite a tome. That said, though, I am very familiar with sort of regulations around open data and those sort of things. So for me, what I do believe in is that open source is the future for a lot of different reasons. But the most important part is that open technology is the pathway to trust and transparency. And I think that's why the UK is so keen to embrace it. If you think about it, customers want a truly open source solution to kind of avoid lock-in. Mm-hmm. Regulators are starting to enforce this. So like PSD2 in financial services, several industries need to realize it to kind of change. Energy, that's a huge transition that needs to take place. Openness and interoperability is a key to that. But healthcare, if you think about just what we need to do, just be able to port your health record from like one hospital to another is like an incredibly complicated thing today. From a business perspective, I get the sense that we're going to see, open source vendors pull ahead of proprietary ones, and especially those that contribute back, robust and industrialized code to those open source projects and support and actively grow them. That to me is a massive differentiator when you're kind of assessing who do you want to partner with as a vendor and which is going to give you that kind of unlock. And there's a huge number of advantages in embracing open source. So, enabling secure collaboration, right? So open source gives you that kind of democratized data. We focus very much on the data layer, and it gives you a greater sort of access to innovation across a community because there's this almost network effect that's taken place. And for businesses, this kind of means facilitating different teams that are able to pull data from different sources in seamless manners and contribute to their objectives, right? Avoiding vendor lock-in. So I kind of mentioned this before, but more and more, this is going to become an incredible differentiator. Like there's actual legislation starting to open up about demonstrating the ability to demonstrate a stress exit from one vendor to another without impacting business continuity. That's actually quite an interesting way of thinking about when you're assessing a vendor. Now, when you really consider it, it's really, can I still access my data and will it impact my business? And you can't really do that if the data is locked down in proprietary format. So, things like alleviating the skills gaps. There are legitimate machines out there that people do not know how to fix in their business. Like the skills have either retired or they just can't be found on the open market. So it's an incredibly expensive change that needs to take place. And almost like that openness brings that benefit of finding skills because it's community driven. It's a very different philosophy to how that works. And there's a trust measure associated with that, like assessing the health of that community before you choose a technology. And that for me is a really interesting one. The fourth one is driving the success of AI. So again, you'll hear the passion pop every time.
Yeah.
I don't think that we have really seen the potential of AI. And I think one of the reasons we haven't is we have a bit of a black box problem. I heard Stephen Fry actually mention this the other day. Like, if who do I sue becomes the first question you ask when you actually have a model, right?
Yeah.
And those are sort of important philosophical things that we'll have to work out as a society. But as AI scales, there is something about open, transparent, traceable model monitoring, observability that's going to be key. Even if it's like, I don't really need to know the inner mechanics, but the fact that I can audit it is a really important facet. And I think that, you're going to start to see AI legislation open up in a very similar way. We have examples of where open source has been kind of used so widely that it has become an open standard, like Linux. And those projects have such massive communities and contributors. And what they have is special. It's a two-sided network effect, a supply of contributors and talent on one side, and users and companies on the other side. And those open standards lead to interoperability, which is kind of a game changer for industries like healthcare, financial services, the energy sector. So it was a very sort of big answer, but it was a pretty big question. So
yeah, it really is. And it's something we could dedicate an entire episode to on its own. But some of those trends that you just talked about there, I believe that's something that Databricks is betting on in a big way too. So can you tell me a little bit more about your mission?
So you're absolutely correct. Like, our founders made a bet early on that cloud would be big, data and AI as a managed service would be the future, and open architecture with communities driving open source to become open standards would drive that acceleration. Linux was obviously an early sort of indicator of this pathway, but a lot of people don't realize this, that in the initial years, our founders focused more on building communities and increasing the contribution of open source projects that we had donated. So, like, for example, at the time it was Apache Spark, which today is now the highest paid skill according to Stack Overflow, and has a huge community and a huge adoption, and is well on its way to becoming an open standard. And this is the thing, we're not just a vendor that uses open source, and we're not just a one and done open source vendor. We've created, we've contributed to, we've fostered the growth of, we've donated some of the most impactful innovations in the open source, sort of modern open source technology world. And this open data lakehouse paradigm, which is kind of an architectural kind of paradigm that we've sort of categorized and it's been embraced, is quickly becoming a standard in its own right. So think of it as an architecture framework, but like sort of 3-tier architecture became like a standardized framework, N-tier architecture too. So Lakehouse has kind of risen to prominence. And, most innovative companies are using this because it kind of helps you to work across the total addressable market of your data. We've got projects like Delta Lake, MLflow, Spark. They're core to this architectural transformation. And we were super proud as a business of how we've accelerated that kind of innovation and adoption. Like, the thing is, though, we've announced recently that all the features and enhancements, so we're kind of donating on a continuum, which is really fascinating. And we're donating these to the Linux Foundation, which should give you an indicator of just the size and scale that we're expecting. And we know that Delta, which we've donated all the kind of Delta Lake APIs as part of the Delta, it was a recent announcement that the Delta Lake 2.0 release will have all APIs in it. Now, something quite interesting about Delta Lake is that it's leveraged by thousands of our clients, and they're running production use cases for like a lot of their business critical applications. So this means that this project has an enviable, industrialized and battle-tested code base. Now, that's coupled with a very healthy and vast community of both individual and corporate contributors. So we're not the only corporate contributor. And that balance of robust code and crowd wisdom is a really healthy sign. I'm not certain there's many projects out there that can provide that kind of level of risk assurance that like clients are looking for. Even in normal proprietary technology, this is just a totally different level. And it's probably a good thing for clients to kind of consider when they're evaluating is like the health of that community, the risk assurance, how solid is the code. What's really amazed me since joining Databricks. So, as I said, I was a client, I was a partner, but since joining, the level of commitment we give to open standards, the open source community, we advocate for communities and we advocate for that kind of contributor growth, because contributor growth is the thing that allows a platform to become de-risked. It drives that network effect, it drives that acceptance, and it drives a more democratic contribution that kind of shapes the project. It's an incredibly powerful thing. And today we're seeing a kind of worldwide shift. The world is embracing open source, and open source makes sort of accessing, distributing, reusing, all these different things of data quick and a lot simpler. And I think that's our philosophy on things, but it's also a massive sort of benefit to the people that actually want sort of more control and visibility and observability of their data, but also the whether they be clients or end user consumers. So I think there's going to be a push and pull, and I'm really loving the fact that we're sort of trailblazing a little bit in this regard.
I'm glad you mentioned push and pull now, because I must admit, as an overcautious ex-IT guy, the prospect of openness and collaboration and creating new solutions is incredibly exciting, but it also will make me a little bit nervous in some circles, especially because of the global conflict that we're seeing everywhere at the moment. But can you tell me more about what the global shift to openness means, especially in terms of risks and benefits, etc.?
So this is a super cool question, and the reason it's super cool is because it's so layered, and if we start on the risk side,
yeah.
So like if you think broadly, open versus proprietary, that used to be a kind of 1-0 thing.
Yeah,
it's not anymore. It's a very layered, multi-layered spectrum, and the evaluation of that needs to be really strongly considered. DIY open source, so you're kind of grabbing open source and you're building your own sort of wrapper, that's still going to have exactly the same challenges it had in the past. Whereas managed open source takes away a lot of those challenges. So like borrowing from Simon Wardley, it's a bit like building a toaster versus building your own toaster using open source toaster parts. Okay, do I want to build the toaster when my differentiation is the bread and the toast? And those are sort of solid questions that you would expect people to start to interrogate, especially at this given time. I'll jump on to the next layer, which is the openness as it relates to data, because that's really kind of where we are trying to innovate. Open data formats and protocols doesn't mean that the data isn't secured or encrypted. So there's a clear picture there. It also doesn't mean that access controls and permissions to consume are removed. It doesn't mean that the data is not modeled in a way that makes it easy. Like the data is going to be modeled in a way that is not going to make it easy for a bad actor to kind of get access to it. So if anything, openness means you need less copies and you can kind of work smarter to offset your risk. So if you consider the alternative, keeping data in proprietary formats that can only be accessed through that proprietary format, it still has risks. We've seen this because there's a lot of breaches, and I can tell you a lot of those breaches are off, proprietary data. They just learn the format. That's how they sort of evolve. If anything, having many different proprietary formats, so you have like this chain of them, that's going to be really slow and problematic when it comes to enforcing different security measures and governance measures. So in other words, it's really going to slow down focusing on your bread and your toast. So many businesses, while they want to innovate, they struggle to unlock their data. Okay, why? Because many organizations currently operate on legacy data proprietary formats, which is essentially true of warehouses. The complexity of these kind of structures are sort of generally, they're in silos. They've got a sort of problem. They're not easily distributed. These legacy architectures, they require a host of different skills to run and manage. The issues are that the sort of data architecture and sheer number of data technologies that are needed for all the different things that you want to do, they just slow everything down. So like, and not to kill the toaster analogy, but businesses have been waiting a really long time for their toast, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, I speak to a lot of business leaders. There's a huge number of unmet needs from data. There's an expectation that things in modern technology would have moved faster, but they haven't. The real benefit to openness is efficiency. It's opening up the stack and solving far bigger, more interesting problems. And we fundamentally believe that our sort of lake house, that strong modern data foundation, that standard technology, the openness, the reduction of the copy and paste of data between different tools, this idea that you can simplify a lot of the skills and you can simplify a lot of the processing, it means lots of toast. And what's cool about that is it's new and more interesting problems emerge. So like, now I need to actually use AI because I'm producing so much toast and gives me a lot of different optionality. I get to use AI to recommend the best toast to deal with the economic downturn, to deal with rising inflation, to deal with all the other madness that's going on in the world today and the uncertainty, right? So, and that's truly what business people are looking for. There's such vast data coming out there. It has to be processed faster. It has to be processed in a more unified way. And it has to also have some decision science that helps support the direction and the choices that, business leaders and consumers make. And for me, that is one of the greatest things about open. And another thing that I'm super, excited about is like, we have a unique differentiator called delta sharing. It's this ability to share, secure live. It's a secure live sharing protocol, but it allows for a lot more kind of variations of consumption patterns to emerge. Many open source projects out there. So like there's a spectrum of them that are actively supporting, being able to plug into the delta sharing protocol. This means a lot of things, but what it ultimately means is you don't need Databricks to access, this data. Once the data is processed and sort of organized, it opens up new consumption patterns. It means that consuming constructs like marketplaces, clean rooms, are all possible for like an entire variety of data assets. Models, files, dashboards, it could be much broader than just sharing data. And a huge focus for us is something we call Unity Catalog, which provides lineage, security, and access governance to, data that is these assets that are kind of shared in this way. Now, this greatly simplifies things like interoperability, expands the scope beyond like BI and analytics. And it takes us to a kind of place where there's a lot more that can happen with that data as a consequence of standardizing and opening up formats and things like that, and just having a more democratized way of accessing your data that's more unified.
I love that. And I also love, I think you're wasted in tech, because I love how you've took some of the most complex and global problems that we're experiencing right now, and the solutions to them, brought them right back down to bread and toast. And it works. It really does. And to further bring it to life, do you have any other examples or possibly use cases of how you've helped some of the biggest names in businesses with this approach?
So one of my favorites, and I spoke to them actually a big conference the other day, was Shell. Now, everyone sort of is aware of the energy challenge and this kind of move to net zero, climate change, and Shell's at the forefront of that, and one of the sort of leaders in this. They use data and AI as a key to this. They're using it to improve operational efficiencies, to drive their customer engagement. They're using it to tap into innovations in sort of renewable energy. They have huge volumes of data. I mean, like unspeakably huge volumes. And they've chosen Databricks to help be one of the foundational components. They've got a platform called shell.ai. And this platform today empowers hundreds of teams, like teams of engineers, scientists, analysts. I think there's like in excess of 250 data teams in total. And these teams are getting to innovate together and they have this kind of ambition to cleaner energy, and that's just a really cool example. There's others like we've helped HSBC to reinvent mobile payments. We're helping Schneider Electric with something they call the Data Factory, which is their way of kind of building out use cases that spread across their business in this kind of factory model. And the factory model is something that we're seeing a lot of companies sort of adopt. And it's really fascinating that they can just get this kind of velocity of unlocked potential. And that's just because they've untrapped the trapped value of the data that they had before, and they're using AI and analytics in a far more industrious way, but they're bringing the teams together. And I think for me, that's the most interesting, because it's kind of cognitive diversity arrives together in that way. You've got these different teams that are looking at the world from different problems, and they're sharing experiences and collaborating in a way they've never done before. And that's something that openness and that whole community sort of drives. And it's something that we're starting to see our customers start to go, hey, you know what? Like, this is a way to solve some of our talent problems. We can build these communities ourselves, because then people have meaning in the work that they have. They have meaning in coming, and they have a shared kind of solution that they're working towards. They're not just focused on the parts of the toaster anymore. They're getting to do really interesting things with toast and bread. And I think I've killed that analogy totally.
And what I love about what we're talking about here as well is you're helping some of the biggest businesses in the world solve very real problems. And the question I've got to ask is, but what keeps you up at night? And how do you keep, your curiosity and open-mindedness alive to find new solutions and step out of your comfort zone to overcome those challenges that keep you up at night too?
It's quite keeping me up at night. So generally, I either wake up because of some specific problem or a kind of curious thought. And I also often wake up because my 4-year-old decides that it's time for me to wake up. But we're kind of figuring that one out. More often than not, though, it's something that was subconsciously bugging me. And it has to do with one of our clients or one of our partners, something they said, some challenge, some big meaty problem that they're trying to solve. And I find myself making a link to something completely insane and adjacent. And the reason is because, as people get to know me, they realize I do a lot. I'm what you would call a lifelong learner. I love reading. I love podcasts. I love audiobooks. And I habit stack. I'll listen to a podcast while I'm running. I'll listen to a podcast while I'm running, pushing a pram and trying to have a meeting. So I do crazy things where I try to see how many things I can do at the same time. But we do a lot of traveling. And I think there's something in that kind of experiencing different things in different ways. There's a reason that they say some of the biggest innovators of the world are foreigners, because they don't just accept that the way things work here is the way they should work. They get to actually experience it as an outsider coming. So travel gives me that kind of regular exposure and forces that kind of open mind. And just to kind of put that into, realistic terms, I've got a 4-year-old, as you know, who's been to 18 countries. And remember, we just lived through a 2-year pandemic. So there's a lot of travel that she's managed to fit in the sort of edges. So I love combining ideas, things like, looking at this data factory thing, but also aligning it to what Toyota did with lean manufacturing, or what Acer did with the smile curve, and, this production and distribution, thinking of data through the way in which we thought about, production of atomic goods. And so for me, that's sort of where I really enjoy that curious spirit, looking at something that Spotify might be doing and going, I wonder if that would work for synthetic data. I really love those adjacencies. And for me, that just keeps me kind of open-minded and curious.
Absolutely love that. And you said Spotify there, which is a good reminder for me, because this means it's the time of the podcast where we have a little bit of fun with you. So can you tell me either a book that has inspired you or that you would recommend, or a favourite song that inspires you or helps you get your head in the zone when you're going for that run that we can add to our Spotify playlist? What are you going to leave us with? And is there a story behind that choice too?
So it's a book. It's not a song. Yeah. So I read this book this year called Brave New Work. The author is Aaron Dignam. I'll get it right. It's about kind of self-management and reinventing organizations. And it's really sort of helped me to frame how we think about organizations. And he's got this notion called an organization operating system, which is kind of cool because it's that you've got that kind of operating system that we work with in tech, but now there's one applied to an organization. And he's got these really great analogies too. Like he talks about roundabouts versus traffic lights and how that is a form of management. The one is kind of command control management, the other self-management. Would you believe that there's less accidents on roundabouts? And it's because you're kind of giving people that accountability to navigate around the circle themselves and avoid people, as opposed to the traffic light where you're kind of expecting people to do what they're told. So that's a really fascinating framing. And, one of my real curiosities, because it sort of helps with my clients, is kind of figuring out how great companies become more adaptive and yet still remain trusted. So for me, that book just kind of really blew my mind this year.
Awesome. Well, I'll get that added to our Amazon wish list. I can't thank you enough for spending a good 40 minutes with me today, because I know how busy you are. So spending that time with to share your story, I'm incredibly grateful. If there's any way I can thank you, I'm going to try and throw something into the universe now, because some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests on this podcast or listened to the show. So with that in mind, is there a person you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with, and why? Because he or she might listen to this, and we'll throw that out into the universe and see what we can manifest today. But who would you choose?
Well, this was kind of hard. It's actually, if I'm going to pick one, it's going to be Ben Thompson. And I just enjoy reading most of the things he says because he's kind of out there. But the thing he does is he's so, analytical about dissecting businesses, which is just something I find, as you heard from the book, super fascinating. So and I do think some of his research on aggregation theory is so relevant to the data and AI world. And to sit down and just have a breakfast and kind of almost whiteboard that with breakfast would be a totally cool thing to do.
100%. And I can't thank you enough for coming on here. We're going to throw that out into the ether and see what we can create there. But before I let you go, for anyone listening that would just like to find out more information about anything that you do, the topics we explored today, or just keeping up to speed with Databricks, or contact your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
Well, if you're trying to reach out to me personally, I'm on LinkedIn. That's pretty much my professional space for connection. I'm often at events, so please sort of tap me up. We can have a chat. Databricks.com, so www.databricks.com. You'll find a lot of material about our customers, and so a lot of stories out there, a lot of thought leadership. At Databricks is our Twitter handle, and most of that will be where you'll get to kind of connect with us and see what the company's doing and sort of how we're moving and what we're up to next.
Well, I think we covered so much in a short amount of time there, from the global shift to openness, what this means, the risks, the benefits, to your personal pastime of habit stacking, and of course your well-travelled 4-year-old, and leaving us with a great book too. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share that with me today.
It's been my pleasure, and thanks. It's been a great chat.
I feel so blessed to get to speak with people like today's guest every single day. There's so much gold in the conversation, so many big takeaways, and certainly food for thought for me around data strategies, open source, and the importance of opening data sets to form the backbone of innovation, efficiency and growth. So many big talking points, but you've heard from me, you've heard from today's guest, but I want to hear about how you're navigating these uncharted digital waters. And as always, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., all at Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So let me know your thoughts, insights, and any questions you may have. And I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. So thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.